I'm your host, Eric Espinosa, and I'm kicking off this podcast today by sharing a little something about myself. So, before I got into media and news production, I worked in banking. Surprise, I was that guy that woke up every morning, I put on a tie, I went to work. It was one of my part time jobs when I was in university. And I recall on my first day, I was tasked with organizing and filing customer files in the branch. And believe me when I say there were hundreds of them. But the way that we organize and share those files have definitely changed today because obviously companies are leveraging technology to share large files. And I'm talking about from banking to healthcare. But as companies shift to the cloud, the risk is going up. And we see that in the headlines, we see that in the numbers. Cybercrime is projected to cost businesses over 10 trillion, not billion, trillion in 2025. And many breaches go undetected for months. Look, we know that technology has created new risks, but at the same time, it's giving us the tools to fight back. And one of the tools gaining fresh momentum is managed file transfers. You might know them as MFTs. They help organizations move data securely and efficiently, especially when combined with cloud-native platforms. But they've since leveled up when paired with AI-driven solutions. So to help us unpack this today, we're joined by Oded Nahum of Ness Digital Engineering. He's an expert in cloud strategy. He explains why MFTs are essential to modern cloud infrastructures, how they work, and how his team is making the technology accessible even to those without a developer or IT background. So if you're using a cloud-native platform, this episode is for you.
Hi everyone, my name is Oded Nahum. I work for Ness Digital Engineering. Currently my role is the global head of the cloud and streaming, data streaming practice. My team is a consulting arm that works alongside our engineering friends at Ness. We tend to work with many clients that try to solve complicated and challenging problems when it comes to cloud. Anything from adoption to strategy to optimization to figuring out which technologies to use. So we get to touch the very core of systems of the clients that we work with. A lot of time we push their imagination and boundaries a little bit more about how to maximize the value of what cloud computing could do. And this is really kind of the way that I approach cloud is it's a value enabler. On its own, it's just a platform. It's what you do with it and how you understand the business problems that you're trying to solve for your clients that defines the way that we operate what we're building for our clients.
Perfect. I'm excited to dive deeper into this. Oded, thank you. First, I want to thank you for taking the time to join me today for this episode. I'm sure your insight will be very valuable for the variety of listeners out there that are listening right now, especially those that are looking to build their company's AI infrastructure. We're seeing organizations increasingly double down on AI and data-driven strategies, and the numbers show this specifically. And I'm going to quote here KPMG report. Over the next year, 68% of companies are planning to invest between 50 million and 250 million. So this is companies of all sizes. This is having a big impact on platforms like ASW and Azure and how they are evolving specifically. Can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so AI, I've kind of looked at it as like when this hype kind of picked up, I was like, wait, why are you guys getting excited? We've been doing it for about 10 years, right? But actually what triggered this thing is not AI, is Gen AI, right? AI is an artificial intelligence, machine learning existed for quite some time, and we've been in that space. I mean, pretty much every kind of a data engineering and analytics workload uses some of these things. What made this thing so interesting is the generative AI, which basically allows these models to start creating things that did not exist before. And that opened up this big Pandora box that we're trying to figure out now what to do. There's a huge amount of excitement, right? And everybody's trying to figure out, how do I use it? What's the value? Where do I put it to work? Many companies that we work with are trying various different things. And I think that we're all in a certain way looking at, okay, what is the actual business value that I can bring? Where do I go from a pilot to actually get this thing to work? I think we're in the last 6 months seeing positive signs of the technology and the use cases. It's going from just a crazy hype to there's real value that we can create. It comes with a whole set of challenges, right? Don't get me wrong. This is still kind of an unknown territory for many of us, of the things it can do and the challenges that it brings, not just from a knowledge perspective, but from adoption, from, you're kind of giving half your brain to a machine that you hope the machine will get it right, and it doesn't always do that, right? So we're still in the middle of that hype and journey, but it's becoming a little bit more clear and definitely more interesting.
Why would you say most enterprises are using, I guess, more cloud native AI infrastructure? Like, what would be the benefits
Well,
of this specifically?
one of the things about AI is that it takes an enormous amount of compute power. These are specialized silicons, NVIDIAs of the world. I mean, companies don't normally go and invest, millions of dollars setting up the infrastructure that they need to run these models. And in the cloud, it's just very accessible, right? For you to bring up a workload and says, go run these things on cloud infrastructure becomes super easy. I mean, that has been one of the values of cloud before Gen AI, right? The fact that you can get access to all of the latest and greatest technology with literally a click of a button without commitment of buying anything, right? So this becomes a consumption-based model is very attractive. How do you experiment? How do you iterate? How do you test different things? That's what makes cloud the perfect place to start running AI or Gen AI workloads. For many companies, a lot of this data is on the cloud as well. And if you start building Gen AI applications, I'm not talking ChatGPT, but RAGs that looks at your own data, that data is in the cloud. So obviously you want to run it where your data is. So it's a kind of a perfect fit. Even though today we are seeing kind of like specialized cloud environments that are focusing on just giving you the raw power of a GPU processing, they come at a better price point. They don't have all of the manageability that AWS and Azure gives us and all of the tools and UIs. You still have to do the heavy lifting. But if you're just looking at the price per GPU cycle, you can find interesting pricing alternatives.
I always used to associate GPUs with gaming, and now
Yeah.
I'm hearing it a lot more in terms of building infrastructures for companies, because there is, I guess, when you're thinking about a company, especially that's just starting, in terms of investing, you want to make sure that you have enough money to invest in this infrastructure, right? But it sounds like at least the cloud native platforms allow people to kind of enter this realm a little bit, like, with their finances in mind. Do you know what I'm saying?
Well, that's at least, I wish more of them would do that, right?
Yeah.
Understanding the cloud economics is still, I think, an industry-wide challenge, right? The fact that someone's giving you access to an incredible technology says, go and use it. And it's only like 3 cents per second, before you start looking at it and you get the bill at the end of the month, it's like, oh my God, what did I just do? That is still a problem. But if you get it right, yes, the economics is very attractive. But it is still something that we as an industry trying to figure out, the cost modeling of cloud, right? Is it better to run it on-prem? And, the last few years we had this movement called, cloud exits, where people's like, oh, cloud is too expensive, I'm going back to my data center. I don't think it's a big phenomena, but it does happen. And there's scenarios where you say, you know what, for my workload, my data center, is better. I'm
And a
okay with
big
it.
focus recently has been MFTs, which are managed file transfers. I just learned about this, but for those that are unfamiliar, can you explain a little bit more about what that
Yeah,
is?
so MFT is making a comeback because it's actually not a new technology. Um, we've been moving files for many, many years. There's a bunch of like traditional solutions that companies used to run in their data centers, big monolithic Windows-based solutions. And the problem became with these solutions is that one, security. You mentioned security. So to keep up the security patches on these machines, sometimes challenging. There were some breaches that companies got scared of. But the biggest problem was manageability. How do you manage a system that needs to process 10,000, 20,000, 50,000 files per day? I'm not talking in a year, per day. Think of any large regulated industry that needs to work with their business partners, right? Which are not internal business units of the company. A bank, credit companies, payment processing, insurance company, car manufacturer. All of them have hundreds, if not thousands, of business partners that continuously need to send files to them, whether it's a car configuration or a loan application. So essentially, you're opening up, the front door of your most secure environment. It says, send me 100,000 files. That is a huge security problem that needs to be understood, because security sometimes it's a question of statistics, right? If I got 3 people in my house, I know who they are, I can vouch for them. If I got 10,000 people coming into my house, statistically, one of them might be a bad actor. So MFT started moving to the cloud because it had the scale to process a lot of that data, and it had the right set of controls to create that end-to-end security structure. Anywhere from the protocol, we use SFTP, and SFTP has been around for a long time. And I don't know if you ever heard of the Lindy effect. It's interesting ways of looking. The Lindy effect basically says the amount of time that something has survived can predict how long it will be in the future, right? So think of
That's very interesting.
Shakespeare, right? It's been around for a while. Maybe it's going to be here 100 years from now, right? Or that's kind of the way, and it's like an interesting statistical model. SFTP as a protocol kind of survived the test of time. It's been here for 30 years. It's industry accepted. And that allows us to create this communication channel between anyone and my own data center. Now, once data gets into the cloud, we can apply multiple layers of control over it, anywhere from virus scanning to PII scanning to whatever. And this is AI comes into the play here, because we can do some anomaly detection and starting to understand patterns that might suggest that this is not what we expected to get. How do you do it at massive scale and fully automated? Because nobody's sitting and clicking 100,000 times to move a file from one place to the other. So that's suddenly got the excitement back to how do we use these things with companies that still rely on files, right? Whether it's a PDF or Excel or CSV or and it created a very interesting kind of structure. We're seeing already the evolution of MFT, because if you look at just data movements across organizations, there's various other ways. There's APIs, there's event-driven architectures, and MFT fits very well into that bigger picture of data exchange platforms.
So are you suggesting this is going to become, like, I guess, the primary solution in terms of, or the direction that most organizations are going for when it comes to transferring these types of files?
If the data that you're moving is a file, it is definitely the workhorse that does all of that work, the heavy lifting. More modern architectures evolve streaming data. So I'll give you an example, right? Think of an exchange, right? Capital market exchange, people trade stuff. This thing produces an enormous amount of data that continuously being streamed over to a system that analyzes that, looks at the data. That is a streaming driven architecture. Not most, but definitely some of the older systems do not support the ability to stream. So what they do is they package that data in big files and then they move it. What we call the end of day batch processing. That's where MFT comes in. If the system is more modern, that it has the ability to stream data live, then we use streaming technologies like Kafka and things like this. But these two work very well together, right? And in many situations, we see both of them coexist. If the system that's producing the data is old and it only understands files, let's MFT it. If it can stream, let's stream it. And both of them can be processed, both of them can be understood and then analyzed and stored and put into a data warehouse and analytics and AI and all of the fun stuff we do with data.
The industry for me that comes to mind would be the financial industry.
Yeah, that's these guys.
Are they, because I know you guys obviously specialize in MFTs. Are they like the primary Would you say the primary industry that's kind of focusing on this one as a secure way to transfer data?
Yeah. Think payment processing, right? How many credit card transactions run in the US in a day? I don't know, trillions. All of these things are aggregated through different exchanges and become files that contains these transactions, and then they need to go to a processing or whatever. So this is where you see some of these use cases. Insurance is another one that we see a lot, again, close to financial services. Loan processing, everyone that still relies on somebody sending a file, right? Now multiply that by the scale of that industry. Another industry we're seeing a lot is healthcare. There's still kind of an old school sending files around, right, between different hospitals or clinic. And the files can be an X-ray, but it can also be an application that somebody filled.
That came to mind for me because I was years ago, one of my first jobs was working at a bank. And the first thing I had to do was like file. They had like large filing cabinets.
Yeah,
So all the
yeah.
files of these customers, I literally had to spend the whole day just filing these away. So in my mind, when I think of anything to do with filing, it's banking, right?
Yeah, no, it's definitely, I think, the biggest industry that we're seeing that picking these things up. And it's for them, it's a replacement of the old products because they had them before. They've been using it, but they're old, they're monolithic, they're hard to manage, they break, they need to be patched, there's security issues with them. And they're not close to where the data is or where the data is being processed. And that's really where MFT in the cloud makes it really interesting, because once the file comes in, I can do with it, there's endless things that we can process that file. I can pick it up in AWS, process it, and send it to Google, for example. Google BigQuery is one of the fastest and most sophisticated analytics engine. So companies want to use Google BigQuery, but MFT runs on AWS in a much better way. So these patterns work very, very well. So that's kind of a multi-cloud play. But there's so many things we can do with the data as it comes in that you couldn't do when it was on-prem, right? I mean, that's what gets people excited, and the imagination here is the limits of what you can do with some of the workflows and the processing of the data. A lot of it, again, we mentioned security. It is a big thing. We're connecting pretty much every MFT we build is connected to a security system that continuously monitor the behavior of it, understanding patterns and anomalies, and try to detect scenarios because if you're getting 10,000 files a day from multiple sources that, yes, that they're your clients, but they're not companies that you are in charge of their security. If they get breached and somehow that file ended up with you, now it's your problem. So that's where security comes in and needs to be very, very tight and strict, and everything that comes in has to be monitored, scanned, understood, analyzed before it goes downstream for the processing of that, because hackers are really good at moving across systems.
And using the same tools, right? Like as much as we're using AI for our benefit, they're using it as a tool for them to hack.
Yeah,
But
we've seen some demos and scenarios of how an infected object or file gets into an S3 bucket, like a storage thing, and starts moving laterally, right? So it identifies the system that it can infect itself. And then ultimately the goal for them is to get access to some sort of a credentials that they can leverage, right? And it's surprisingly easy for people with knowledge, right? And I think what we see with clients is that they don't understand how to build the security for these solutions. Cloud has the attack surface of the cloud is massive. It's not like big data center, big walls. I got my firewalls, nothing coming in and out. Cloud by design needs to be accessible and exposed, not exposed, but accessible over the network. So the attack surface is much, much larger.
Out of curiosity, is that ever part of the discussion with the clients that you're serving in terms of if they decide, let's say I'm going to collaborate with this company, right? Like a bank collaborate with, a different company and they're transferring files. Do you ever kind of advise them to do a lot more research in terms of what type of security systems the company that they're collaborating has in place, just to make sure that everything's protected?
Absolutely. And for many companies, it becomes a policy, right? If you want to work with me, here's the checklist. prove to me that you follow these processes. And there's a whole bunch of regulations and standards that validate that you are following these best practices for security. And there's even standards that can be implemented on the technology level itself. So it's kind of a handshake between systems. It says, I want to send you data. It's like, okay, here's the format. And it's okay, I can approve you sending. So we can even implement some of that in the technology itself. But yeah, these standards exist. Right? And we're trying to promote more and more companies to agree on these standards, because ultimately we want these collaboration. I mean, that's the lifeline of many companies, to be able to send data. So we have to make it accessible, workable, but not crazy complex that nobody knows how to implement this.
Does this also speak to like companies that integrate with platforms? Let's say somebody's using ASW, and it's like a fleet management company, and then they're integrating, I don't know, another tool with another company into their platform. Does this also apply with them in terms of the platform, not just transferring data?
Usually, I mean, it's not streamlined, put it this way. And you know, the cloud providers don't always like to collaborate with one another. I mean, there's ways to do that, but it's not an industry standard. Multi-cloud, right, which now everybody's doing multi-cloud, is still, if you ask me, I mean, the biggest blocker of multi-cloud is the cloud providers themselves, because you know they want to be the only one, the only game in town, right? So there's no real standard between how to exchange information between the clouds, but there's standards and technology that we can leverage to do that. But it's still a bit kind of a Wild West.
In terms of, I guess, the company that you work for, right? Ness, digital engineering, the solution that you provide specifically for MFT, what makes your company stand out in comparison to other companies that are entering this market?
Yeah. So I think what's interesting about Ness and as a company and MFT, maybe more specific, that Ness started as an engineering firm, software development. We still are an engineering firm. A few years ago, we started investing in building capabilities around cloud, in addition, you know, some more kind of interesting data and technologies. But ultimately, most of Ness is people who write software, right? So we're coming in from this approach. Some other people who are becoming, you know, cloud kind of consulting firm come from the IT space. So this is data centers, you know, operating system servers. MFT for many years was part of the IT side. It wasn't part of software development. And we kind of flipped that around. It's like, yes, we understand the software and the architecture and the infrastructure very well. But the real kicker is what we build, what I think is two things. One, the workflow engine. So we've customized the workflow engine that allows us to implement any kind of a business logic that the customer can think of about what happens when I get the file. So think about this: file comes in to an entry point, it triggers an event. That event gets picked up, and now I need to figure out what to do with this file, right? And this is where it can get, you know, very interesting, sometimes complex, but you can do a lot of different things that you couldn't do before. Take the file, scan it, wait for 3 other files to arrive, but don't do it if it's 2 in the afternoon because I want to wait until midnight. All these like crazy rules that basically control the behavior until that process ends and the file or the files end up in their destination. So that's one thing. The second thing is that we build a user interface that simplifies the adoption. So a lot of companies approaching this maybe new to the cloud, they're used to Windows systems, click. Now this is all infrastructure as code, and it's like, you know, there's a bit of a blocker or a barrier to adoption. So we build a UI, so allows you to get up to speed pretty fast, how we build these workflows. And the last thing that we're building now, which I think is very cool, that workflow engine is something that we found that for many people is complicated. Because the people who define the workflows are business people, right? They're not techies. We have our own language that used to create these workflows. And then we started looking, wait, so if a business guy can explain to me in plain language what they want to do, that's a perfect use case for Gen AI. So essentially, we've created an interface for them to describe to me in your own human language what workflow you want to run. I will then get the machine to translate that into the language of how that gets implemented. That's a very nice use case of Gen AI. So think they would say a file would come in. If the file name equals blah blah dot text, then take the file, change its name, compress it, run a virus scan on it, and then move it to a database that lives in a different data set. Now they can explain it in language. They don't know how to explain it in code. That's where Gen AI does a really good job. So that's kind of where some of the things that we're developing. The other thing I think is integrations, right? These systems never live on its own. Nobody's moving files for the fun of moving files. You move it to integrate this with data warehouse, analytics, processing. And we're quite good at doing those integrations with other systems for them.
Integration, I feel like, is just another word for collaboration. And a lot of what I think software developers, engineers are just notorious for being collaborators, obviously, because they work on projects together. So a lot of what you said, I think these different points speak to collaboration. And you guys are in the field of that, right? In terms of transferring files safely, because you guys have years of experience in doing that specifically.
Yeah, and understanding also the systems or the software that needs to actually understand that file and do something with it is where that integration comes in. Because if your only view is like, I'm just doing the plumbing of moving files, then it's like half the picture. Taking these
That
files, now putting them into an application or to a database or to an analytics system, this is kind of the other half where we're building these things.
Before I let you go, what are some final pieces of advice you recommend IT decision makers in this upcoming year in 2025?
Whoa, that's a loaded question. I think that
First thing
one
that
thing
comes to mind.
I think that the first thing I would say, specifically for cloud, always look at cloud as the value enabler of your business. Try to find out what that value is, try to quantify it, and then see how you're going to use it for you. Don't go crazy all into the cloud without thinking about how that thing is going to look like and be operated. And then I'm sure you'll be successful in doing that. So start with value, technology after.
Very good advice. Oded, thanks again for joining me. If
Absolutely.
somebody's looking to, I guess, pick your brain a little bit more, connect with you, what is the best way that they can get in touch?
LinkedIn, you know, there's not too many people with my name. You can Google me or LinkedIn and find me. Happy
Oded.
to collaborate.
All right. I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.